A long-haired brunette with a lively smile spoke enthusiastically about Rico, a once sought-after model and now a Hollywood movie star. She mentioned with slight disbelief that he'd ordered 1,000 red roses and, with undisguised curiosity, inquired about his engagement. Meanwhile, a fair-haired young man with a neat red bow tie smiled happily when someone mentioned Ikakin, a blogger with a 10 million strong audience. He was asked what he felt at that moment, and the young man, clearly excited, struggled to find the words. Then the happy couple announced their surprise wedding, proclaiming themselves the era's greatest duo. The crowd enthusiastically joined in the jubilation, and a sense of shared celebration erupted across the country. Amidst the general delight, the young man sprawled on the bed stared at his phone. He dryly declared that divorce was inevitable, as if tossing the curtain on someone else's idyll with one terse statement. Then, 18-year-old Kei Watanabe introduced himself as an unemployed youth, still inexperienced in love. He had long noticed certain silhouettes reflected directly in his gaze like shadows visible only to him. Afterwards, the disheveled young man lounged on the couch, scrolling through his newsfeed. He noticed that, surprisingly quickly, someone had already gotten close to the presenter, and on the TV screen, people were entangled in red threads, hinting at hidden connections. Meanwhile, the two palms reached out to each other, connected by a thin scarlet thread, ready to snap at the slightest movement. Their connection seemed precarious, as if held together by mere chance. A little later, the cheerful couple posed with peace signs, radiating a carefree demeanor. Comments praised their performance and wished for their happiness to last forever, as if it could be sealed with a simple wish. Kei lay on the bed again, covering his face with his hand. He quietly concluded that everything that was happening was a complete sham, and the words sounded like a death sentence. Behind him, a line of adults, shown from behind, seemed to form. The thought that there were no truly worthy people among them hung in the air like a heavy affirmation. Meanwhile, Kanad smiled calmly, and the two young men awaited a response. She gently explained that she was currently single, and the story compared her to a spider, skillfully weaving her web without a shred of remorse. Afterwards, the scarred, bespectacled man asked if anyone was interested in making some extra money. His appearance resembled that of a male spider, spinning his web through the networks of others, connecting them for profit. By the age of 18, Kei had managed to discern countless threads intersecting before him in a chaotic pattern. He stood amidst this interweaving, as if at the center of an invisible diagram. Later, he stretched out on the floor, raising his legs up, and, looking at the ceiling, exhaled a short TMP, as if trying to release the tension with one sound. Suddenly, a small spider appeared nearby, its appearance causing him to yelp sharply. This tiny creature was enough to shatter his fragile peace. The young man then sat down, hugging his knees, and confessed that living alone had led him to hate these creatures. Meanwhile, Zen, looking tired, asked if the creature had disappeared. Later, he curled up on his cluttered bed and reflected that he preferred moderate online interactions. He found excessive intimacy as tiring as complete solitude. Meanwhile, a video about the release of the Better Wars Episode 12 trailer appeared on the screen. Users discussed the project's length, the director, and even admitted to envying those who could watch it right now. In another thread, someone reported running away from home after his parents attempted to kill him, adding that he had no friends. In response, another member noted that Eurus was acting strange again. Finally, the discussion took a darker turn. One user suggested that committing suicide after a murder could supposedly reverse the consequences, another sarcastically supported the idea, and a certain Colonel Sugi intervened and demanded a cessation, simultaneously filing a complaint. Tama suggested stoking the fire even more, adding with a slight smile that it would be better if they did it together. Her gaze was insistent and her movements were filled with excitement, as if this were a game to her. Meanwhile, a conversation began online. One participant urged them to work together, insisting on a common initiative. However, the other participant admitted he was afraid to even look in that direction and categorically refused to get involved. Afterwards, Kei stretched out on the floor among the bookcases and wearily asked what was expected of him. The silence in the room only emphasized his intense thoughts. A little later, an open wallet with a scattering of coins and receipts became a silent testimony to the disorder. Against this backdrop, a thought emerged about a complete misunderstanding of how the world works. Then he sprawled out on the bed in the cluttered room and remarked with grim irony that he'd hit rock bottom. The words sounded almost playful, but there was a hint of bitterness behind them. Afterwards, the young man lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling and pondering his lack of money and food. The situation seemed disgusting to him, and this feeling left him no peace. Meanwhile, in a narrow city alley, he clutched his side in pain and whispered that he didn't intend to die now. His silhouette against the gray walls looked fragile but determined. Nearby, a bearded stranger with a predatory smile noticed that it was that very same guy. His tone was confident, as if there was no doubt. Another man in a vest and glasses joined the conversation, calling Kay a friend of the criminal. His calm seemed alarming. In response, the young man raised his gaze, his expression firm. Despite his fatigue and the scars of his past wounds, he decided that only he could handle this. Later, he stood inside the protective barrier, listening intently to every sound. Someone remarked that his wariness resembled the habits of a small animal. When asked if he was sure, Kay answered affirmatively, though a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. There was determination in his voice, even if doubt hadn't yet completely vanished. He suddenly shuddered, clutching the fabric of his shirt as the voiceover began to say, "In such a case." The uncertainty of what was happening heightened his anxiety. Then Kinnaid flashed her police badge and politely asked them to come with her. Her tone remained even, as if it were a formality. The young man quickly declared he knew nothing, trying to remain calm. Meanwhile, she watched him without any undue emotion, as if assessing his every movement. The next moment, a large man grabbed him firmly by the shoulders and informed him that he was counting on him. Kay looked up and his expression grew serious. A panorama of a city with high-rise buildings under partly cloudy skies replaced the narrow alley. Against this backdrop, the question arose as to why he was being held up in the first place. Later, he sat at the table, his head bowed, as if resigned to the inevitable. Kinnaid stood next to him, arms crossed, silently watching him. The realization hit him suddenly. Criminal threats could lead to legal action. He sweated with tension while she remained outwardly calm, the thought of the cyber police haunting him. Finally, doubts about the legality of what was happening overwhelmed his mind. He tried to understand why there had been no warning or warrant, and why exactly he was being detained, but he couldn't find a clear answer. Kay stuttered, trying to squeeze out a word, but a sharp shout demanded that Morikawa not lie. The voice was so loud that the air in the room seemed to compress. He winced and, sweating, asked if his interlocutor really intended to make all this public. In response, Kinnaid coldly declared that she could pin as many accusations on him as she wanted. Then someone abruptly challenged him, offering to try, promising consequences he would regret more than death itself. The threat hung in the silence like a taut string. Kay mentally dismissed the situation as madness, unable to believe his own ears. Meanwhile, Zen, with a beaming smile, noted that one of the people present was always distinguished by his forthrightness and willingness to help. He glanced around nervously and asked what had happened to his neighbor, whether he was a repeat offender. The question sounded sharp, as if trying to grasp at any kind of explanation. World Eye confidently declared that there was no connection between Kay and the man. Kinnaid stood with her arms crossed, silently watching the tense exchange. Sweat streamed down the young man's temples as a muscular man appeared before him, slamming his fist on the table. He declared that he saw people as nothing more than tools, and there was no doubt about it. Immediately afterward, two men approached and demanded to know where Urus was. Kay froze, feeling a sense of alarm rising within him. A close-up revealed a distorted face, glistening with beads of sweat and tears. The thought flashed through his mind that the man in the next room was his exact replica. Under the night sky, the two watched from the sidelines and quietly remarked that both boys were social outcasts. Their faces were half hidden in shadow, which gave their words added weight. Someone nearby clenched their teeth, feeling the tension rising. The thought was voiced that people have strong convictions, but their hearts are fragile, as if loaded with explosives. Kay looked down as the bespectacled man handed him a bowl and added that he probably didn't want to hear about it. The woman stood behind him, not interfering. He admitted he hated discussing the topic, even though it was part of his job description. There was a hint of restrained hostility in his voice. The young man recalled how many times he'd encountered adults who tried to manipulate others. These memories made his gaze colder. Holding the food bowl and chopsticks, he felt a surge of rage and mentally admitted that he hated them all. The feeling was almost physical. Soon, a dark suspicion entered his mind. One day he would become like Morikawa. This thought only increased the tension. The woman exchanged a glance with the man and, without a word, understood who he was talking about. He let out a short exclamation of surprise in response. Kay sat on the floor, lost in anxious thoughts, aware that the brother and sister were police officers. Their silhouettes were visible nearby, almost lost in the gloom. Kinnaid suddenly approached and demanded to know the source of the information. The young man became nervous, and the bespectacled man glared at him. At the end, the scarred man warned the younger man that he had a psychopathic look in his eyes. The woman continued to watch silently, her eyes never leaving the tense scene. Key and Kanade leaned closer, examining the reflection in the eye. The young man froze in surprise, while she calmly noted that the mirror reflection between them revealed something odd. He quickly announced that he would contact another Momo agent. Zen, surprised, asked if he meant Sai with his psycho eyes. At that moment, a young man with dilated, intense pupils announced in shock that there existed a person capable of seeing what was hidden from others. His gaze glowed with an almost painful certainty. Kei inquired about what exactly he could see, and Kanade became wary and asked how he knew. Two people in the room, one wearing glasses, the other a mask, listened without interrupting. The young man quietly explained that he discerned the threads that connected people. She asked what exactly he noticed between them, referring to these very connections. The man then laughed and noted that they were facing a brother and sister who trusted a third party, though the atmosphere remained prickly. Behind him, the serious woman remained silent. Kei was again amazed by the stranger's strength, but then decided to introduce himself. At that moment, someone called out to Zen, as if urging him to intervene. A burly man enthusiastically announced that their team was the Malmo Special Clairvoyance Squad, investigators with psycho eyes. The two women reacted with alarm and disbelief. Zen introduced himself and explained that his ability allowed him to see vigilance. He immediately noticed that two others had similar eyes and was surprised by the coincidence. Kei felt the pieces of the puzzle coming together inside him. He realized exactly how he had been identified. Confusion and sudden realization mixed on his face. Suddenly, Kanade angrily kicked someone, chiding them for their talkativeness. They quickly acknowledged their mistake, calling it their own. Kei, having pulled himself together, declared that, given everything that was happening, they couldn't just let them go. His tone was firm, without the previous hesitation. He added tensely that the attacks were pointless, even as beads of sweat trickled down his forehead. Despite his fatigue, his resolve only grew stronger. Kanade sharply demanded that this stop immediately, and the young man noted to himself that he was looking at a typical bad adult. Meanwhile, two people quickly drew Zen's attention to the screen. One of them shouted at him to look at it immediately. Kei sensed the aura of Urus's message intensifying and realized they had entered a dangerous zone. The threatening news of the stabbing in Shinjuku was reflected in his gaze. He turned around with alarm, while the other, covered in sweat, wondered whether their condition had changed or whether the message itself had influenced their decision. The young man stared at his phone with concern, wondering if the notification he had received earlier was the source of his confusion. Then he sharply warned that people would die because of this. His words were filled with fear, and thoughts of his comrades and murder haunted him. Finally, the man with short curly hair admitted that he was responsible for the victims' deaths. He spoke quietly and seriously, while the man standing next to him listened without a word. The bespectacled man calmly explained that they needed the ability to see the threads that connect people, emphasizing its crucial importance to the operation. His voice carried a certainty, as if without this gift, further steps would be meaningless. Kei asked again, confused, asking for clarification, but almost immediately cut himself off and declared that now was not the time for unnecessary questions. It was as if he had decided to act without delving into everything completely. He then asked whether they would be able to prepare the lockdown in time. Kanade replied that there were 15 minutes left before the warning announcement, and the risk remained unchanged. The young man, focused on the screen, let out a quiet, uncertain. Zen, standing behind him, added that there was another serious problem that mustn't be forgotten. Kei continued to operate the device, explaining that he was monitoring Urus's communications. Digital signals and graphs flickered around the display, creating the feeling of a tense race against time. A message appeared on the screen with frightening instructions on how to use a box cutter on the carotid artery, along with advice to wear layers of clothing when attacking multiple people. Kei noted that there were people in the chat encouraging the sender. A man in glasses sharply warned someone to be careful. A woman, covered in blood, firmly replied that she understood the order. Meanwhile, Kanade stood alone by the large window and, when asked about the location, said she was above the movie theater. A city spread out beyond the glass. A close-up showed Kei's eye, reflecting a strange symbol. He mentally acknowledged that he was still searching for the right spot. The group examined a complex network of suspicious routes converging on a single hub. They carefully analyzed the map, trying to identify potential threats and escape routes. A nearby strained eye reflected a cracked silhouette. A hand touched a face, and a demand to act immediately sounded. Kei looked down on the bustling street, observing the crowd like a giant web of interconnected people. Every movement seemed part of a larger pattern. Sweat streamed down his face as someone called out to him urgently. He thought the city center had a particularly strong effect on him. Suddenly, a violent cough shook him, and a large amount of liquid splashed onto the wall. It was clear that something was wrong inside him. World Eye sharply warned that there were too many threads, then shouted angrily for no one to complain. The tension in the room reached breaking point. The wounded man with disheveled hair clutched his chest and warned that if Urus killed anyone, many would perish. The three behind him listened intently to every word. Kei was left alone in the empty, dimly lit room and thought bitterly that the adults didn't understand anything. The silence around him only reinforced this feeling. He suddenly asked if his interlocutor was able to see the threads of connections. The other responded with a confused interjection, not immediately understanding the question. Two boys were chatting animatedly. One asked what they could see now, while the other hesitated at a loss for words. A pause fell between them. Finally, Kay quietly announced that his father had died yesterday. His interlocutor asked, surprised, why he hadn't mentioned it earlier, and a heavy silence fell over the room. Kay admitted hoarsely that if he'd known earlier, they might have been able to save him. The words came hard, as if each letter cut him to the quick. A little later, a girl with short blonde hair openly confessed her feelings to him and said she wanted to be with him from now on. He listened silently, without interrupting or looking up. The schoolgirl in uniform, maintaining a calm that hinted at pain, quietly asked if he was being serious. Her gaze searched for the confirmation she dreaded. Meanwhile, two men were discussing Kay. One asked if he was special, and the other confirmed that he could see connections between people. His head was prominent in the foreground, as if he'd accidentally found himself at the center of the conversation. The man with slicked back hair remarked that this was natural for their son, after all, he was part of the family. The younger one smiled sheepishly and looked down, at a loss for words. A little later, the boy walked away while the woman insistently demanded consent and the man turned away. The child silently noted that even the adults he trusted ultimately failed him. Someone knelt with torn trousers and recalled the countless threads of connections that reminded them of something important. Thoughts stretched like those very lines, haunting them. The man was bent over on the grass, exhausted from vomiting, while the thought of powerlessness sounded in his head. Knowing about someone else's misfortune and not being able to intervene is the hardest thing. The muscular man demanded an answer from Kay immediately. The girl next to him irritably declared the guy useless and asked for 5 more minutes. Soon the girl was racing down a crowded street, and someone's voice sharply told her to forever fear people, calling her a withdrawn loser. The crowd around her seemed to compress the space. Kay sat alone, hunched over, thinking he didn't want to be drawn into this. Somewhere, a demand was heard not to disturb the adults, as if his opinion meant nothing. With a tired, moist gaze, he inwardly rejected any participation, feeling deeply tired and hurt. Decision seemed the only way to preserve the remnants of himself. A close-up of the eye revealed the reflection of a small figure in the center, and he mentally asked what exactly he was seeing. The question came suddenly, like a blow. A lone silhouette made its way through the crowd, feeling entangled in a web. The people around him seemed connected by invisible lines, while he seemed to fall out of the general pattern. On the cobbled street, most of the passers-by were connected by threads, but the man in the hoodie walked without a single connection. The thought that this couldn't be true pierced his consciousness. Someone spotted Eurus on the balcony above the cinema and wondered if he really had no connections. His height emphasized his aloofness. Kay hotly retorted that a child cannot exist without attachments. School, family, and friends inevitably create knots. His words sounded like an attempt to refute the obvious. The figure in the hoodie stood alone on the tile, and Kay watched from behind, realizing that what was written was true and fate had cut all the threads, despite his reluctance to become like this. He sank to his knees, entangled in countless connections, feeling like a prisoner of his own visions. Each line pressed down, intensifying the feeling of hopelessness. Covered in sweat and exhausted, Kay thought they were both people who had given up on relationships. The admission came quietly, but it was final. A close-up of the eye revealed swollen tears, and in those reflections he recognized a simple truth: a person with whom he has no connection can't be stopped. The thought of complete loneliness brought a heavy sense of resignation. A little later, Kay caught a faint, almost invisible line extending from the group below. He wondered if it was too thin to immediately distinguish among the many others. He stood stunned, trying to comprehend what exactly was happening and where everything was heading. His gaze was fixed ahead, as if reality had suddenly cracked. Meanwhile, the agitated man asked Zen for another minute, almost begging. Another man nearby acknowledged that the situation was becoming critical. The crowd flickered in a reflection of his pupil, and Kay noted that despite the crowd, no one was being cautious. Someone could die at any moment, and this realization heightened his anxiety. Someone, sweating and barely containing their excitement, reported that the target had been located and asked what to do next. The voice sounded tense, as if there was almost no time left. The conversation continued. One asked if they were sure, and in response, they confirmed that the route intersected with other routes. On the street below, people were walking in different directions, creating a chaotic pattern. The woman, her gaze intense, praised the work done, but added that it wasn't over yet. Her words sounded like a warning of hidden risks. Suddenly, a clarification was announced. The target was a little girl. Against the backdrop of the busy street, this message seemed especially alarming. The bespectacled man exclaimed in surprise when he realized they were talking about a child. The woman behind him frowned, realizing the scale of the problem. Kanade was warned to proceed with extreme caution, reminding them that they were dealing with a child with a future yet to be lived. A mistake could be fatal. The bespectacled man added that if she accidentally provoked the girl and she lost her temper, her fate could become even darker. These words hung like a heavy weight. Kanade insisted they take up a position for an arrest, although she admitted she'd wanted to do so, but hadn't been able to. There was irritation in her voice. From above, a stream of people could be seen moving down the street, and suddenly a report came in that a girl had started running away. Panic spread instantly. Kay glanced anxiously at the disheveled man, who, turning to the damaged wall, muttered that everything was bad. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. The man in glasses shouted that it didn't matter anymore. His face expressed determination to act at any cost. The same man with spiky hair announced that someone had been arrested for making threats, while below, passers-by continued walking, and the child was rushing among them. World Eye took a sharp swipe at the running girl, declaring that several lives were more important in the future of one child. His words were harsh and unwavering. Tama desperately warned that if they failed to save both of them, the consequences would be severe. She reinforced her words with a sharp gesture, demanding attention. Finally, someone, with a desperate expression on their face, declared that there was no longer any choice and that a decision had to be made now. At that moment, the tension reached its breaking point, forcing everyone to realize the cost of the upcoming step. The blonde girl with twin ponytails turned around abruptly and hastily apologized to the man standing with his back to her. Her voice wavered, as if she feared the apology wouldn't be enough. A little later, the sweat-drenched young man smiled awkwardly and introduced himself as K3, unemployed and inexperienced in relationships. His tone was a mixture of self-irony and an attempt to defuse the situation. The girl in the hoodie timidly asked if they could take what was in someone else's pocket, then immediately warned that they might get caught. Her words were quiet but tense. Kay suddenly perked up and suggested they watch Better Wars, episode 12, together. The hooded figure agreed, adding that he'd do so as soon as the episode aired. He promised to buy her a cola and buttered popcorn, then asked if she preferred orange soda. A hint of excitement crept into his voice. One remarked that there had been too many spin-offs lately. Another, hidden by the shadow of his hood, wondered if the Emperor would be resurrected or something similar. The first enthusiastically declared that he was now even more agitated, while his companion responded calmly and suggested they move on. The contrast between them was palpable. The blonde apologized for the late reply and promised to hug them tighter when they finally saw it. Her words rang with genuine anticipation. Kanade, unable to hold back tears, snuggled into Key's arms and confessed that she wanted to watch Better Wars together. He quietly assured her that everything was fine. The man in glasses and a vest announced that the threat posed by the online post had completely disappeared. His short partner nodded approvingly. In the crowded city alley, Kay glanced around and decided it was time to find those she was supposed to meet. His gaze became focused. Tama loudly warned the others to be careful as chaos erupted in the street. People stumbled, reacting to the approaching danger that no one had yet fully seen. World Eye watched as two people in the distance took off running, and from the ground, someone shouted Eurus's name and screamed in terror. Panic spread rapidly. The bespectacled man grabbed the other man's hand and admitted they'd made a mistake. His tension was noticeable even in his abrupt movements. Kay spotted silhouettes running ahead and realized they were Eurus's accomplices. However, someone nearby quickly dismissed this assumption. Two men with backpacks rushed down a narrow passage, and one of them admitted that he had originally intended to kidnap her. These words only heightened her anxiety. Zen abruptly ordered them to split up and demanded that Kanade name the route. In the background, Kay briefly confirmed his readiness to proceed. The young man sank, feeling powerless, and thought there was nothing he could do to help. An invisible voice confidently told him to leave everything else to them. Flushed and sweating, he confessed to someone that he was truly cool. His gaze was filled with respect and relief. Finally, Kay declared that he would weave together the threads to change the outcome. Behind him, a stunned man hid behind a broken glass door, while another watched from the sidelines, holding his breath. Key, barely able to stand, heard Kanade's sharp command to stay away. At the same moment, Zen rushed forward, preparing to meet the invisible threat head-on. A man with a cloth over his face stepped out of the shadows and brandished a massive sword, sarcastically asking if anyone was breaking the firearms and bladed weapons laws. The blade flashed in the narrow passage. Kay spun around in the crowded alley, wondering tensely if they were doomed to defeat. There was an irritated helplessness in his movements. He tried to reassure the others, declaring that a single armed enemy was no cause for panic, but immediately added that he wasn't acting alone. His gaze darted behind him, where something was already approaching. Looking around, Kay saw that they were surrounded by numerous opponents. Someone nearby quietly wondered how they were going to withstand the onslaught of so many at once. The bespectacled man dryly noted that the situation was getting worse, and at that moment, one of his allies received a crushing blow to the face. Blood flew, confirming the seriousness of the situation. World Eye gave Kay a sharp push, causing him to stagger. Watching him with a stern gaze, he mentally admitted that this guy was causing too much trouble. The young man walked away without looking back, as if he'd made his own decision. Zen and the other man watched his departure closely, sensing a significant twist hidden in this action. Nearby, someone clutched their stomach and vomited blood violently, then collapsed onto the pavement. The pain was obvious even without words. World Eye sent two opponents flying with a powerful kick. Kay watched silently as the force ripped apart the space around him. With a shocked expression on his face and a sweat-drenched forehead, he realized that someone had already taken out four of them. His eyes widened in surprise. World Eye, staring hard ahead, thought that to see such a world was to experience constant pain. His expression conveyed the harsh truth of reality. He stood confidently amid the chaos, surrounded by people and noise, and noted to himself that his own worldview was also far from soft. It had its fair share of rough edges. A burly man in glasses straightened his tie and, with a broad smile, declared that the ability to withstand the blows of fate is what makes someone tough. His enthusiasm sounded unexpectedly cheerful. The young man ahead froze, suddenly sensing the threads of fate that bound those around him. The realization came with a cold, piercing realization. Kay listened dubiously to Kinnaid as she spoke of the mysterious detectives who believed in a power called Psycho Eyes. However, she frankly admitted that she wasn't entirely sure of its nature. A close-up showed his eye, filled with sweat and shock. Inside, he couldn't accept what he saw, even though it was so obvious. The battle raged with renewed vigor, bodies flew into the air, weapons flew everywhere. Someone wondered in surprise if humans had learned to fly. One man threw furious blows, complaining that none of them were landing, and then was thrown back himself. His bewilderment gave way to pain. The muscular, bespectacled man, openly angered, called his opponent a freak and, without slowing down, scattered several more people around him. The space around him became a storm of force. Kinnaid calmly stated that her brother had never lost a fight. Kia looked at her in surprise, as if he hadn't expected such certainty. He explained that he sensed others' wariness like ripples on water, which then turned into thorny spikes that seemed to pierce the opponent. This was his attempt to describe his own gift. The bespectacled man noted that the more experienced the opponent, the more difficult the fight became. At the same moment, the other figure deftly dodged and responded with a spinning kick. The same man added that heightened vigilance reveals the enemy's next move. He easily evaded a swift attack aimed directly at him. The armored enemy swung his heavy weapons, exposing his weak points. The skirmish grew increasingly fierce. Kay knocked the man out with a powerful kick and declared that the stronger the opponent, the stronger the brother. His words rang with unwavering faith. Later, one of the soldiers carefully picked up the girl and gently asked if she felt dizzy. For a moment, all the cruelty vanished from that scene. Kay stood in the middle of the street among fallen people when a man holding a child told him that this was his dread of fate. The words sounded like both a sentence and a confession. The burly man gave a thumbs up, praising the result, and the woman noted that the opponents had dispersed further. Kay was surprised by this man's strange energy. He strode forward energetically while two people nearby discussed his behavior. One wondered what kind of adult would go out of his way for a couple of teenagers he barely knew. World Eye abruptly approached the sweating man and demanded an explanation, not hiding his irritation. Kiwatanabe watched silently, remaining behind. The young man smiled for a moment, but then his face darkened as he wondered if he was becoming a bad adult. Finally, he lowered his head, resigned to the heavy thought. Kay stood to the side, looking down wearily, while the others chatted among themselves. One remarked that he was too cool, another admitted that he was embarrassed to hear it. The cityscape gave way to silence, and Kay found himself on a bench, lost in thought. A man in a vest entered through the door behind him. He apologized for getting him into trouble, but the sturdy companion assured him it was no big deal. His response was calm. Kay listened intently as an elderly man in glasses announced that the girl's guardian had been found hanged at home. The news hung heavy on his mind. They sat next to each other, and the elder explained that the kidnapper intended to sell her to pay off debts, citing homelessness, a failed double suicide attempt, and a desperate search for electricity and Wi-Fi. The story sounded unvarnished. Kay lowered his gaze, acknowledging that her loneliness and despair were understandable. His silence held a hint of understanding. The bespectacled man added that it was his connection with her, that very thread of fate that allowed him to save the girl. Kay listened seriously without looking up. World Eye, arms crossed, asked the seated K if he found it unpleasant to be read. The young man avoided eye contact and remained silent. A bespectacled man with a scarred face asked his interlocutor seriously what he hated most. His gaze was direct, without a hint of mockery. The disheveled youth listened attentively as the man with the stitched face explained that trouble is felt where the connection was once severed. These words sounded like a warning. Kay sat silently while World Eye stood nearby, explaining that psycho eyes reveal the invisible, but more often than not, it's precisely that which is best left unnoticed. There was no pathos in his tone, only experience. The bespectacled man added that most cases begin with someone else's ignored misfortune. Their job is to find what others prefer not to see. Kay gravely confirmed that the psycho eyes were Momo's primary tool. He said this as if he had finally accepted the rules of the game. A tall, bespectacled man placed a hand on his shoulder and said that this was precisely why they needed him. The gesture was confident, almost mentor-like. The young man, his eyes hopeful, asked if they would continue saving people together. His question sounded more like a wish than a sure thing. The same boy timidly added whether he could one day become as cool an adult as the older man before him. Two women stood off to the side, silently observing the conversation. The man turned to Morikawa-kun, asking for his opinion. The others reacted differently. Some glanced sideways, others turned away sharply. The disheveled youth suddenly called out to Morikawa and stopped mid-sentence, as if struck by a sudden revelation. His expression betrayed confusion. Kay addressed World Eye directly, claiming to have been the man in the next room during the interrogation. The large figure warned him not to feign naivety. One of those present reminded him that the final decision still rested with Kay. Another objected, calling it unfair, his voice tinged with concern. A man offered to take a girl to the movies while she shyly held someone's hand. Two men watched from the hallway. The young man awkwardly explained that by collaborating with them, he could earn enough tickets. His words teetered between hope and doubt. One asked if it was really worth letting him go, and the other stood at the open door, looking out and not turning around. The man in glasses assured the woman in the dress that he believed the man in question would return. She asked if he had tried to recruit him. The young man stood in front of the building, clutching his chest and looking forward with determination. Two people watched him from a window above, and one noted that he no longer looked like a frightened little animal. In the hallway, two men and a woman discussed why so many bullies were targeting the girl. The question remained unanswered. Kay shared his suspicions, pointing out many uncertainties. Kinnaid listened attentively, worry and beads of sweat appearing on her face. The disheveled youth thoughtfully concluded that something significant had happened between the time Eurus was kidnapped and the end of the fight. His words conveyed the sense that this event had changed everything. The elderly man thoughtfully noted that someone had been watching him closely this whole time. A dark figure was indeed visible in the distance near the wall entangled with cables. A close-up of the eye showed the reflection of the mysterious silhouette, and it became clear that it knew about his special vision and never let him out of its sight for a moment. The man in the goggles nervously admitted he thought he'd met this guy before. The other man asked doubtfully if he was mistaken. A man in glasses confidently introduced World Eye, while a woman behind him remained calm. A short figure at his side silently observed the proceedings. Zen asked if this was Momo's challenge. Kay replied that it didn't matter what it was, as long as they walked down the corridor together. The city skyline stretched out beneath the evening sky, and one of them promised to crush anyone who tried to cause trouble again. World Eye towered over the wounded Kay, who sat on the floor. The young man silently wondered if someone like him was capable of becoming a worthy adult. Someone nearby let out a shocked sigh, clutching another tightly to them, unable to accept what had happened. The exclamations were sincere and harsh. Kay recalled being suspected by the police, then detained, drawn into a chase, and later rescuing the girl. All of the events unfolded so suddenly that they seemed like a foreign story. When he woke up, he felt as if yesterday's self had returned, weighing him down like a heavy weight. His face remained tense. With his head bowed and his gaze darkened, Kay noted with irritation that people don't change overnight. He stubbornly repeated that he wanted to forget everything. He lay down exhausted while two cheerful men in aprons cleaned nearby. One recalled how stressful the previous day had been and wondered if he would ever be that mature. Another man angrily accused the police of reckless driving and trespassing, while someone else complained of muscle pain from lack of exercise and grumbled that the room only made things worse. Kay wearily replied that it had nothing to do with his interlocutor. The other man skeptically asked if he was sure of that. A man in glasses and an apron mockingly addressed a disheveled guy lying on the floor, asking if his psycho eyes could see their connection. Another, with a bandaged head, insisted that everything was not as it seemed. In response, Kay quietly admitted that he truly wanted to be near him. The older man pointed a gun at Kay and said that, having calmed down, he was going to explain everything. The young man tensed, preparing to defend himself. The elder continued, talking about the Psycho Eyes and Malmo's group, as well as his intention to take him to the police station for an explanation. His words were non-threatening, but serious. Kay silently acknowledged that the muscle pain was an inevitable price to pay. He stood by the closed door in the dimly lit room, lost in thought. The older man laughed loudly behind the wheel, while Kei Watanabe slumped in the back seat, exhausted. The driver cursed, not hiding his irritation. The bespectacled man laughed loudly, while the other, flushed and sweaty, hastened to declare that he hadn't succumbed to the mood at all. Awkwardness hung in the air. An older man in glasses began explaining that there are people with a special gift, the ability to see what's hidden from others, a phenomenon called Psycho Eyes. Behind him, a young man listened intently to every word. He added that the name itself appeared relatively recently, and it was still unknown whether it was related to the functioning of the visual cortex or to the influence of consciousness. The question remained open. A group of people stood in the shadows, and one of them remarked that it was Malmo who had gathered these strange, restless individuals. A hint of pride crept into his voice. The building rose up under a clear sky, while someone explained how they had built it together, turning it into a refuge for those who didn't fit into the usual mold. This place had become their home. Kinnaid, holding a document in her hand, announced the disbandment of the Special Psycho-Visual Investigation Unit. Her words were formal and cold. Zen handed Kei the papers and invited him to peruse the contents, then said his name with a grin. They both bent over the text. The man in glasses remarked that Malmo might be closed permanently. Kei looked at him in bewilderment, not understanding what he was getting at. Zen sternly warned the two-seated men that the decision to disband depended on their actions and demanded they take the message seriously. The atmosphere grew tense. One of those present asked again, as there had been talk of closing recently, and received a brief confirmation. The short answer was emotionless. A close-up of Kei's eye reflected the tension as an unseen voice announced that Internal Affairs, represented by Rukuro Mutsu, wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. The news sounded like a death sentence. Kei sat with a tired, detached look while Zen and Kinnaid discussed the warrantless detention. World Eye sarcastically compared their methods to extortion by a street gang. The young man countered that intervening before a situation escalated was no different from doing nothing. Zen firmly emphasized the need to prevent escalation in advance. Zen bluntly questioned the reckless occult investigations, asking how much taxpayer money was being wasted and how many incidents were reported annually. His words sounded like an accusation. He also sternly rebuked Kei for using civilians who weren't government employees. The young man looked confused and tense. The man in the suit warned the two people sitting there that if they wanted to avoid the final closure, they'd better keep a low profile. The warning was blunt. Kei firmly asked him not to try to be cunning, and Zen confirmed his seriousness, emphasizing that he was not joking. A tense silence filled the cramped room. The older man asked what to do next, while the younger man remembered the warning not to do anything stupid. Both looked constrained in the confined space. Kei indignantly called the situation childish, and the man in glasses explained that, in essence, they were expected to take specific actions. The point became obvious. The argument continued in the room with the benches. One insisted it was an order and demanded an explanation for their recklessness, while the other reminded them that without results, the unit would be liquidated anyway. Their words sounded like a last resort. The tall man by the window admitted he was bad at leaving things unfinished. The young man next to him asked irritably what other dubious situations he'd gotten himself into before. World Eye concentrated, and a glowing symbol flashed in its pupil as it demonstrated its gift. As an example, it pointed to something visible only to itself. There was an unusual tension in the station. Officers sat at their desks, shuffling papers, but there was a sense of unease in the air. Someone remarked that the atmosphere was especially tense today. The young man turned to the massive figure and asked if what was happening had anything to do with him. He inflated the bag and replied that he wished it were that simple. A man with a goatee, holding an object wrapped in cloth, remarked that if something seems strange, there's always a reason behind it. His words sounded like a warning. A sudden cry of discovery rang out in the bustling police office, instantly shaking the officers seated and standing. The work rhythm was disrupted. Most people turned at the sound from the dark corridor, but a few people, including one who clicked his tongue in irritation, remained alert and continued to watch the exit. Zen sensed the change in the atmosphere and quietly remarked that he smelled something new. World Eye confidently walked away, and Kei nervously apologized as if anticipating complications. On the phone, Zen casually referred to the man he was escorting as a common bandit being transferred. The prisoner walked forward silently, not looking up. The bespectacled man doubted that the target was just a petty criminal, and the young officer noted that the security guards were acting too relaxed. The burly guy waved it off, calling it a false alarm, but the young man quickly stopped him, extending his hand and asking him to wait. A close-up of Kay's eye revealed the tension. He sensed that the man before them could be truly dangerous. Sweat beaded on his temples. The world eye was suddenly pierced by a multitude of black threads, and one of those standing nearby was stunned to notice that there were too many of them. Kay was shocked to realize that the threads had color, and the elder explained that the black ones represented a bond woven with hatred and malice. The young man protested heatedly, insisting that the issue wasn't whether the person in front of them was a bad person. His interlocutor listened attentively, their faces almost touching in the tense exchange. World Eye explained that the threads of fate thicken as a person approaches. The two nearby watched as the dark interweaving thickened around them. Kay, covered in sweat, warned that they were heading straight here, his voice tinged with urgency. From above, a view of the city opened up as if through cracked glass, and the thought became clear. Everyone who harbored a grudge against him was moving at the same time. The two exchanged tense glances, and one, wide-eyed, asked if the attack was starting. The disheveled youth chuckled slightly and admitted that it didn't matter because no one would believe him anyway. He reflected on the clues to the case that only he had seen, knowing no one would have believed such details. He remembered how Kay had once shouted out his belief in him, and that memory still warmed him. The young man was surprised to hear the greeting and invitation to Malmu, while the two men debated whether to accept the dubious figure, even if he was important. One of them silently struggled with his own feelings. Kay asked, confused, what they should do next. The tall, bespectacled man, arms crossed under the treetops, muttered hesitantly that they should wait, though he hesitated. A cheerful man with round glasses teased his interlocutor, reminding him that he always finished last. A surprised exclamation followed. Kay tried to justify himself, claiming he'd been perfectly normal in elementary school, but was accused of being a recluse. Their tense argument unfolded amid the chaos of the room. The tired young man admitted that his body could no longer withstand the same strain. The other accepted this calmly, noting that everything was clear. The bespectacled man casually asked, "So what?" and his disheveled companion drawled thoughtfully in response. The conversation proceeded unhurriedly. Kay watched from a distance as the three men stood by the van, one explaining that the man in question was an important figure. His words sounded wary. The man in glasses announced the arrest as police rushed to the scene. The spiky-haired man watched in amazement. Someone screamed in surprise, and two officers and a man in a suit ran quickly down the street toward him. The situation was escalating. A man in glasses chuckled while another asked in confusion why the police were running from the police. Several uniformed officers raced through the city. One nervously inquired why they were kidnapping a criminal, but was abruptly ordered to remain silent and run. He had to put his doubts aside. The man in glasses urgently ordered them to leave at full speed. The young man next to him looked tense, ready to flee. Zen asked in surprise if Kanade had actually walked all the way. Ki briefly praised her work. She noticed that every time she called, this kind of chaos ensued. Behind her, two people were discussing whether this woman was Zen's younger sister. The woman asked Zen if he'd kidnapped someone again, and the man by the car quickly called out to him. The situation remained tense. Kay found himself in front of four people in a car, who greeted him with surprise and anger. One called him a scoundrel, another shouted his name. Inside the car, Zen sharply asked if they really expected to get away with it. Kay and World Eye watched tensely, prepared for any outcome. Ki firmly declared that this was the end for Malmo, but Zen dismissed the words. Kanade, wiping away her sweat, began to speak, while Tama and another man watched closely. Kay shouted to those remaining outside that they were coming with them. She held the wheel confidently, while the two behind her prepared for the next step. Someone sharply ordered everyone to hold on tight and explained that Kay had confirmed that the man had been targeted by other criminals. Therefore, Operation 1 needed to be launched immediately. The car tore down the city street, and an explosion thundered behind them. A voice inside ordered them to evade the attack and maintain control. The truck burst into flames near the building, and Kay noted that the attackers were so brazen that they even dared to attack a police station. The thought sounded alarming. Inside the car, Kay, Zen, and Kanade sat close together. She warned him that he'd clearly seriously angered someone, while Zen stared ahead, his eyes fixed on the road. One man, with a confident grin, announced the start of Operation 2. At the same moment, another reported that patrol cars were already on their tail. The two were racing at high speed, and one noticed they were having to lose even their own. Behind them, the siren of a police car pierced the air. Kay, pale and sweating, leaned out the window and warned that the police themselves were now acting against them. The situation had become even more complicated. A bespectacled man with a bandaged face declared that escaping the city center was impossible. A man with round glasses next to him listened without interrupting. Kay noticed the precise calculation in Kinnaid's actions, but doubt still crept in. The older man in glasses asked her point blank if she was sure of her plan. Several patrol cars sped down the tree-lined avenue. In one, a woman smiled confidently, noting that they only had a few cars left, and her partner added that there were still plenty of pursuers. Tama noticed that Kinnaid hadn't allowed herself to be tracked yet, despite the cameras and GPS. World Eye, watching from a nearby car, mentally dismissed the situation as madness. The three men, including Kay, exchanged glances, and one asked him point-blank what had happened to him. The question sounded serious. Kay looked at the black threads surrounding the man by the ruined wall and pondered their nature. The lines stretched in different directions, creating a grim web. Someone noticed that most of the threads were gathering behind the target and gradually thinning. This meant that he was getting further and further away from his pursuers. From above, a vehicle was visible, converging on multiple surveillance lines. A warning sounded that at this rate, the target could be lost. The car approached a dark tunnel, and Kay noticed two thick green threads visible inside. They were already very close. Kanade pointed to a narrow space and warned that if there was an ambush there would be no escape. Ki nodded, understanding the risk. The young man nervously explained that the people pursuing them weren't in patrol cars and weren't acting officially. The other man hesitated, unsure of what to say. Covered in sweat, Kay wondered if the others had realized their target was right inside their car. The tension inside him grew. Kay and the older man with glasses exchanged a hard look when he admitted that the transfer had leaked. That admission changed everything. Kay noticed several officers at the station acting strangely, as if they were hiding something. From this, he concluded that the possibility of a traitor within the system was too high to ignore. Zen, gripping the steering wheel tightly, warned that if the enemy was already inside, the situation was becoming critical. In the backseat, Kay and another man sat silently, aware of the gravity of the threat. The bespectacled man explained that Internal Affairs was obliged to remain cool, like a police force within a police force. Meanwhile, someone chided another for panicking and suddenly jumping into their car. When everyone had gathered, Kinnaid noticed that, from the moment he appeared, someone had been closely observing the space between the two people. Both men listened to her intently. Kay and World Eye looked tense, sweat beading on their faces, while Zen calmly suggested a connection between the two figures. The older man watched from behind, not interfering. Kay said calmly that everything was under control. Zen and Kinnaid silently accepted his words, though their looks betrayed concern. The motorcycle wheel spun furiously, throwing up debris, and Kay thought about people who harbored grudges or became the object of hatred themselves. A long, dark thread stretched along the narrow street, along which two figures walked. A voice reminded them that they must not tell anyone about this connection. Kinnaid quietly assured a tense World Eye that the thread posed no threat. The others in the car sat silently, lost in thought. The car sped along the narrow passage between the concrete walls, and a statement was made that all the black threads had been shaken off. Two motorcyclists shouted that the target was right in front of them, and the man in glasses raised a megaphone, warning the others. The three in the car exchanged worried glances. The same man with short spiky hair and glasses smirked, holding a megaphone, and asked sarcastically if anyone could really be that stupid. Two motorcycles were chasing a car on an overpass, and someone's voice demanded to know if they were hunting for whoever was inside. One screamed as the other grabbed him roughly by the collar. Nearby, a man in glasses watched with a confident smile. Someone complained with an exhausted look about how much effort had been expended on neutralizing those bandits, and in response there was a short, tense, mocking remark. From above, there was a view of the car parked below, and someone noted with satisfaction that everything was going exactly according to plan. A group of armed men stood outside the building, some held swords, others pistols. Their determined faces indicated readiness for a confrontation. Kay noted with irritation that suspicious groups had been targeting him too often lately. Zen snapped back that he was a magnet for trouble. The young man looked down, and the other, sweating and agitated, asked what he had done to deserve such treatment. Ki apologized to Mutsu, admitting he was causing trouble again. Mutsu listened seriously, his expression betraying restrained concern. Kay thought about how Zen had always covered for him as a child when he'd lost his cool and acted foolishly. He felt bitter at the thought that he'd finally thought he'd matured and reformed. One of them remarked that they had known each other for many years. The other, looking down and rubbing his head, confirmed that their connection went back a long way. Kay, wearing a suit and glasses, calmly stated that he hadn't patronized anyone. The blonde man next to him clarified that he had, after all, done so a couple of times, back when he was still working as a detective. The two sat shoulder to shoulder, and one quietly said that he was the only one who had offered a helping hand. A quiet note of gratitude hung in the air. Kay stood with his back to the city skyline, contemplating his impending separation. Nearby, a man, crouched and tense, briefly replied that he understood. Partially hidden in shadow, he covered his face with his hand and said that if he could maintain his original expression, everything would be fine. Then, with relief, he added that he was glad to no longer see their stupid faces. Someone advised me to simply take care of myself. Two people stood nearby, one with a cross behind his back, and both looked toward the gloomy sky. Kay thanked him for everything he'd done. In response, the other recalled how he jumped into the car that day and wondered if such actions could be forgiven. Sweating and agitated, Kay asked why he was being treated like a criminal. His interlocutor steadfastly denied any involvement. The man quickly apologized for being late due to work and urged the others to hurry up, as the team had finally assembled after years. He insisted it wasn't his fault. The short-haired guy enthusiastically announced on the phone that what was happening was simply insane and insisted that the other person try it too. Another, looking stunned, held the phone to his ear thinking he was seeing something strange. He wondered if it was a hallucination. The blonde man asked tensely over the phone what the strange music was and whether it was drug-related again. His voice was filled with alarm. Kay was racing through the city streets towards the others when a man in a suit appeared from a doorway and ordered them to stop, reminding them of their long-standing promise to get out of this. The next scene showed several dead bodies sitting with their hands covering their eyes as if in prayer, and everything around them was covered in blood. The atmosphere became ominous. Someone screamed in horror, their face contorted as they saw what was happening. The shock was genuine. The man with the bruises on his face quietly admitted he simply wanted to escape. His gaze betrayed weariness and regret. A dark figure with flickering eyes said that someone still hadn't done it. Its presence seemed to thicken the shadows around them. One of the men shouted out that he had already reported it, raising his hat, while below another ran quickly down the street, breathing heavily. The final shot showed a man being held down by two officers. He tried to explain that, despite his past, he was only considered a suspect because nothing was found at the scene. World Eye, with a heavy, oppressive gaze, asked if there was anything else. The elderly man, visibly worried, replied that everything looked more or less like this. Kay asked if there was anything else at the scene besides the body and the large man. His interlocutor became nervous, clearly unsure of what to add. The young man sharply demanded details, holding the trembling man by the shoulder. He admitted that at that moment he was completely out of it, and someone nearby was supporting the wounded man. World Eye cursed in irritation, while Kay, covered in sweat, mentally noted that at least he'd managed to call in time. That was small consolation. He uttered a strange, almost coded phrase, and the man standing next to him frowned, not understanding the meaning. The young man on the right hesitated, not daring to answer. The dark silhouette quietly repeated something similar, and the empty background only reinforced the feeling of incompleteness. The bespectacled elderly man touched his face and pronounced the name, the Eye of the World. The word sounded like a symbol of power, not to be underestimated. World Eye asked for clarification in surprise, while Kay nodded calmly, as if he already understood. Both looked toward the water as if the answer was hidden there. Kay's eyes widened, realizing he'd become a target because he'd seen someone important. Sweat broke out on his temples. The others looked at each other in confusion, and someone admitted they had no idea what was going on. Another cautiously added that it all seemed strange. Kay flared up, demanding an explanation for why they were being attacked now. Tama angrily told him to calm down, but Kanade remained unfazed. The young man anxiously asked what they should do next, and Zen sharply ordered them to act faster. There was a sense of urgency in his voice. Despite his fatigue, Kay firmly declared that everything would work out somehow. A look of determination appeared in his eyes. Zen shouted for everyone to duck, and at that very moment, bullets shattered the car's windows. People around him rushed to take cover behind the car's body. Ki, Zen, and Kanade found themselves caught in a whirlwind of debris, and the young man despairingly admitted that the situation was critical. One called the incident overly reckless, while a man with glasses and a monocle calmly remarked that he expected gunfire. The man in glasses angrily accused the sweating young man, who turned pale and exclaimed that it was all over. World Eye, arms crossed, warned that what they saw wasn't the whole picture. Kay, Kanade, Tama, and Zen looked at him in surprise. The armed men spread out between the parked cars, preparing to surround the target. One announced they were moving in from the flanks. The young man looked stunned, and the older man with glasses stepped forward and declared that the moment was perfect. Two men hurriedly climbed into the car. One cursed in irritation, the other urged him to hurry. Nearby, the third watched silently, not interfering. Ki wondered aloud who these people were tailing them. Zen explained that Mutsu was personally conducting an internal investigation, and through his channel, eyewitness information was crucial. The man in glasses adjusted his frames and declared that they would use all their resources to find the attackers and the informant. The two listened attentively, and one of them wondered how he was going to pull it off. Through a megaphone, the same man loudly accused the kidnappers of targeting someone who had been with them from the start. The armed figures in tactical gear became wary. Kay noted to himself that the move had been unexpectedly clever and admitted it was quite clever. Someone behind him smiled approvingly. The bespectacled man told the young man that he was still far from Kay's level. He asked again, confused, not understanding the point. During the conversation, the two agreed that if Kay hadn't revealed the essence, everything would have ended in complete failure. The thought was no exaggeration. The man in glasses explained that he had merely connected the threads of the mystery and emphasized that the connection was logical. Another added that without Kay's testimony, they would have missed the point. The disheveled youth looked stunned and touched when the elder remarked that he had saved 2 lives again. The words rang with sincere recognition. Kay sharply demanded that he stop, but Zen only clicked his tongue, and the sudden blow made the young man cry out in pain. He asked, confused, if she was referring to the phrase about becoming a cool adult. His expression betrayed surprise. The young man with tousled hair said with feeling that it seemed to have already happened. There was a note of support in his voice. One of the bespectacled men reminded him that he was still a minor. The other, shown from behind, listened without objection. Kay stood by the window with torn curtains and thought about what his life would be like if his father or older brother were nearby. He clenched his chest, admitting he'd never had anyone he could completely trust. The thought was almost physically painful. After a short agreement, he turned away, and Zen, standing confidently with his hands on his hips, told him to take care of himself. Kay quietly admitted that he wanted to be a real adult. Zen called out to him in surprise, his voice tinged with alarm. The young man enthusiastically agreed to join, declaring that he too wanted to work in Malmu. His determination was evident. The little boy happily picked up the Darkhazer figurine and thanked his father, who smiled warmly in return. In conclusion, the two men discussed the film. One said he was glad to hear it. The other enthusiastically admitted that he was also looking forward to the premiere. Kay gently informed the boy that he was going to the bathroom and asked him to wait. The child nodded eagerly, as if it were an important assignment. Approaching the railing, Kay noticed a crowd below and heard a toddler calling him Daddy. Someone out of frame quickly corrected him, pointing to the restroom. The woman looked down calmly, maintaining her composure, while the man next to her began to pronounce the syllable Pa, trying to get her attention. Kinnaid leaned over the bed, holding the small figure, while Key lay there looking exhausted and depressed by what was happening. The quiet residential street seemed peaceful until a voice abruptly ordered silence, followed by a surprised exclamation from an unseen character. Key greeted Kinnaid awkwardly, and she calmly explained that Zen had tasked her with picking up the newcomer. Inside, he was confused, not expecting to see a girl in his home. She playfully noted his interest in Better Wars, and he panicked, remembering past invasions and wondering why girls even paid attention to him. Kay asked if all the goods were in stock, and the armored interlocutor replied that one of the items was especially important to him. Kinnaid, thoughtfully touching her chin, advised him not to touch other people's figurines. He sat with the object in his hands and mumbled vaguely. She firmly ordered him to get dressed, since it was time for them to go out, and he stood there confused, not understanding why there was such a rush. The young man admitted that it was his first time wearing a suit, and the woman next to him responded with an understanding tone. The girl confidently said that it was the t-shirt under the jacket that gave the style its special charm. The guy looked at her with a slight nervousness. Key hesitated, but Kinnaid suddenly switched to a serious tone, urging him to focus. This only increased his anxiety. The city spread out under a clear sky, and someone remarked that this mood perfectly suited their purpose. Another hesitated, not immediately grasping the meaning. A long-haired woman stood at the gate of a guarded building, inquiring if it was a children's institution. 2 uniformed guards watched the entrance. Kinnaid noted the increased security, Kay looked around carefully, and the third participant reported that Zen was already here. Zen jokingly said that since they were riding to work together, it meant Kay was looking after his sister. He grumbled wearily, dissatisfied with his superior's order. The girl sat curled up, clutching the device, tears glistening in her eyes. A quiet voice noted it was her. In the cluttered room, Kay reflected on how, in the end, no one wanted to take her in. This thought left a heavy aftertaste. With a worried expression on his face, he listened to the man in glasses, who reported that, in addition to the previous data, they had managed to discover something else important. Kay cautiously asked if there was anything else they hadn't told him. The 2 men listened with serious expressions without interrupting, as if preparing for the worst. The scarred man noted that the precise nature of her ability was still unknown. The young man next to him frowned in surprise, realizing the scale of the uncertainty. Kay wondered why so many kidnappers were targeting one child and concluded that she must possess a truly rare power. Otherwise, such a rush would be impossible. He nervously explained that only a few people in the entire world knew about the existence of psycho eyes, and that such people could be counted on one hand. His voice sounded tense. The bespectacled man confirmed that this ability was extremely rare. Kay involuntarily pressed his lips together, feeling anxiety creeping closer. Dark figures appeared in my mind's eye, caught in the crosshairs of gunfire, and a voice explained that in the underworld, such forces are often used for evil. The thought sounded grim. Someone admitted that the eye of the world remained a mystery, and even they didn't understand what it was. The uncertainty heightened the tension. Kay recalled how the threat had been thought eliminated many years ago, but recent events had once again made him feel the enemy's presence. Old shadows were returning. The man in the doorway warned that the enemy was prepared to commit kidnappings, mass murder, and even brainwashing to achieve their goal. The words underscored the gravity of the danger. The girl, tears streaming down her face, pressed herself against a large stuffed animal and whispered that they don't even spare children. Toys and photographs lined the shelves behind her, highlighting the contrast. A tired look reminded Kay that it was precisely these kinds of people who had targeted Eurus. The realization weighed heavily on his heart. World Eye calmly offered to take her to the cinema, while Kay, with his head down, thought about how he wanted to be truly understood. He quietly remarked that one glance at the security guards at the entrance was enough to understand the gravity of the situation. Both were staring out the window, their eyes fixed on each other. Kay admitted that he couldn't take her to the movies, and was told that to do so, he first had to get rid of those who stood in his way. With tears in his eyes, he realized that he had indeed come to him again. A hand gently rested on his head, and the gesture was more supportive than words. The smiling character held out a small robot figurine and called it his treasure, asking to accept it as a keepsake. The girl, clutching a dark feather, promised to return and repeated Darkhazer's name in surprise. There was hope in her voice. A close-up showed a disheveled young man quietly asking if someone would disappear again. His eyes mingled with fear and anticipation. The boy told the girl that they would definitely watch Better Wars together, and asked her to hold on to this thought until their meeting. Through the window, one could see how one promised to buy something after watching the film, and the other reacted joyfully, not hiding his delight. Kay stood alone on the street, waving at the departing car as it disappeared around the corner. A voice inside him insistently reminded him that this wasn't just a farewell, but a promise. Kinnaid sat relaxed, with a slight grin, and laughed quietly, while Zen, with a serious face, noted that he had expected to confirm Momo's return after the conversation about the eye of the world. Kay looked out the window wearily, thinking about how someone had overreacted to what was happening. He felt like all he needed to do was get a few people off the stage, and everything would calm down. In the car, one of the passengers asked if they'd seen Kay's face at the base, suspecting he might later claim he'd acted out of emotion. Another recalled that he'd been silent and eye-contactless on the way back. The young man smiled faintly, still unable to believe that the man had proven so trustworthy. This realization warmed him. The narrative noted that their tenuous bond had gradually strengthened, but the childhood pinky promise still seemed distant. Kay lay lost in thought. An unexpected call from an unknown number made him wary. For a moment, he thought it was Kanad. But the call ended, leaving only his voicemail and his surprised gaze on the screen. After a pause, he heard a voice he hadn't heard in a long time. It was his father. The interlocutor asked for a favor hesitantly, as if he himself was ashamed of his request, but still insisted. A trembling hand extended the phone, and a quiet voice asked for some money, as if it was the only way out. Kanade read the message and remarked on how cruel it was to abandon her son and then demand help. Kay sat with his head down, clearly dejected. He curled up on the bed, avoiding everyone's gaze, while she stood next to him, accepting reality as it was. Zen, scrolling through the screen, noticed that this was too much for the morning. Kay flushed and demanded that they not enter his room without an invitation. In response, he was reminded of work and plans for the day. He sat on the edge of the bed, and the elder asked if they were going to meet his father. Kinnaid watched them silently. Kay, covered in sweat, firmly stated that the man who abandoned a child deserved no excuses. His words were filled with pain. World Eye suddenly offered to arrange a meeting, and the young man was confused, not understanding whether it was serious. He watched as the disheveled man gesticulated emotionally, arguing that it was better to act than to regret inaction. Kay clenched his fist vigorously and said that it was better to regret an action than to regret doing nothing. He vehemently rejected any excuses related to family, and his outburst startled his interlocutor. Zen quietly admitted that he had seen with his own eyes the moment their connection was broken, and someone nearby added that Kai was truly special. World Eye awkwardly admitted to Kay that he couldn't see the world the way he did, but felt he lost touch with some people. The others listened silently, without interrupting. Kay quietly remarked that this kind of thing was happening more and more often now. Kinnaid nodded thoughtfully, and the bespectacled man added that such breakups were becoming more common with age. A burly man in a vest, gesturing confidently, told the seated youth that some of the threads could be re-knitted. His words rang with conviction. He promised, if necessary, to hit the hopeless father if he didn't come to his senses. The woman stood next to him, gravely supporting his position. Kay walked carefully down the quiet street, grateful for the lack of passers-by. Inwardly, he wondered what his father had been doing all this time. He glanced at the message with the meeting address, then stopped in a cafe called First Stars, unsure if he was in the right place. The boy hesitantly called out to his father. He turned around with a tired but gentle expression, and Kay noticed how changed and broken he had become. One of them laughed, saying the other's face hadn't changed at all. The other, bowing slightly, admitted he had no right to judge. Kay asked him where he got his number, and the spiky-haired guy started to answer in surprise, but hesitated mid-sentence. He added that he'd been asking around in the old neighborhood and learned something from the manager of the bar where he worked. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Kay offered to order a drink, but the man immediately refused, reminding him that he had no money. Later, sitting across from Zen in a quiet room, Kay admitted that he had lied earlier. He added that he didn't expect him to actually come, but now he wants to honestly express everything he feels. The man, pierced by arrows and looking confused, muttered a vague answer, and the woman at his side sternly asked if this was another lie. Nearby, black and gold threads were intertwined, and the voice explained that both were emanating from the same person. The young man reflected that only when he grew up did he understand the true value of these connections. Zen stood confidently, despite the knives stabbed into his suit, and explained that he had been accumulating grievances and debts for years. Kay sternly warned that at least once a month it is worth paying attention to dreams that pull golden threads, standing next to the shimmering weave. He sat on the edge of the bed with his head down, thinking that every morning after his father left had become difficult. The tired man quietly said that their family ties were more fragile than money and gestured towards his wallet, emphasizing this bitter thought. Kay covered his face with his hand and called his interlocutor pathetic with disgust. His gesture betrayed not just irritation, but the bitterness pent up over the years. He suddenly let out a burst of hatred, admitting that he was sick of adults like that, and it was because of people like that that this feeling was building up inside him. Later, Kay sat alone at the table, his head bowed. He honestly admitted that he was in a terrible situation and didn't know how to get out of it. Nearby, a man with binoculars watched the proceedings, and a small figure next to him reproached him for being overprotective. The man in glasses protested that he had no intention of interfering in the meeting between father and son, but he was accused of always taking the side of one of them and watching from afar to remain unnoticed. Kanade, holding the device, suggested that after the incident with Urus, the eye of the world might have turned its attention to Kay. Kay agreed with Zen, noting that the appearance of a distant relative at such a moment would look extremely suspicious. Kanade was surprised at how quickly he agreed, and someone nearby reported noticing something strange. A man wearing sunglasses, a mask, and a cap stood out in the crowd. His appearance seemed suspicious. They analyzed the movement of people and concluded that the group would soon enter the coffee shop, although their route through the streets looked confusing. Someone specified that they saw a man wearing a flat cap, glasses, a mask, and a short-sleeved shirt. They noticed him watching the entrance to the cafe closely while remaining on guard and confirmed that it was the same man. A close-up showed wide eyes with swirling patterns, and inside there was a thought that something was about to happen. Sitting across from his father, Kay saw the gold and black threads around him thicken and sway, as if responding to the tension. He noticed the confusion on the man's face and asked point-blank if he was being pursued by debt collectors. He hesitantly responded to Kay's request, calling him his father. Zen sharply ordered Kay to immediately hide in the back of the building, or at least in the restroom. The young man called out to him in surprise. Kay, raising his voice, warned Zen about a suspicious man approaching the coffee shop. Zen looked up. World Eye watched the street through binoculars and thought that this man was probably one of those who demanded debts from his father. The man in glasses explained that the threads connected to his father had begun to move, while the other added cautiously that it was too early to draw any final conclusions. Zen warned Kay that the enemies might be targeting him specifically. Kay paused, considering what he'd said, and for a moment chose inaction, as if buying himself time. Kay, covered in sweat, abruptly picked up his phone and demanded to see the coffee shop and the man from the video call. His voice was urgent, almost desperate. The man in glasses, holding a glass of drink and looking at the screen, raised his eyebrows in surprise and confidently declared that he could get the necessary information through this. At that moment, Kay realized that the black and gold threads around the stranger were intertwined with his father's. His suspicion was confirmed. With a desperate, tense expression on his face, he asked Zen if he could do the same. Standing at the door, Kay firmly said that now we need to put everything else aside and focus on one specific person. He was ordered to act as if nothing was happening and stay close to his father. He hesitated, wanted to ask more questions, but held back. Stopping in the doorway, Kay apologized for everything he had already gone through and added that he would be back soon. With a vulnerable expression, he admitted that he really wanted to see the man again, and for the first time, there was a sincerity in his words. Later, Kay sat alone in a quiet cafe, quietly apologizing as a dark figure watched him from behind a partition. Meanwhile, the woman, her gaze intense, sharply demanded to know where her father was going, and her eyes met his worried but determined expression.